Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday English Channel with Tom and Kate. We're really happy to have you with us today.
Yes, thanks for being here with us again. It's always a good moment when we sit down like this and just talk. No rush, no pressure, just a normal conversation. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good. Quite relaxed, actually. It's one of those moments where nothing special is happening, but everything feels calm and simple. And I think those are the best moments to have a conversation. What about you?
I feel the same. Nothing exciting, nothing stressful, just a normal situation. And I think that's important because most real conversations happen in moments like this. Not in special situations, not in big events, just in everyday life.
Exactly. And that connects perfectly with today's topic, because today we're going to talk about something that happens constantly in everyday life. Answering questions in English.
Yes, and not in a complicated way. We're not going to build long, perfect answers. We're going to focus on how people actually answer questions in real conversations.
And before we go further, if you enjoy these calm and natural English conversations, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share this episode with someone who is learning English. It really helps us, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's start with something very simple. In everyday conversations, people ask a lot of questions. Simple questions most of the time. Things like, how are you? What are you doing? Where are you going? And what's interesting is that the answers are usually much shorter than learners expect.
Yes, that's something we see very often. Many learners think they need to give a complete answer with full sentences and perfect grammar. But in reality, most answers are short, simple, and sometimes even incomplete. For example, if someone asks you, "How are you?" you don't need to think about a long answer. You can simply say, "I'm good," or "I'm fine," or "pretty good."
And sometimes people don't even use a full sentence. They might say, not bad, or all good, or even can't complain.
Exactly. And these expressions are very common. They sound natural, and they are used all the time in real conversations.
Another important point is that people don't always answer in detail. For example, if someone asks, "What are you doing?" the answer can be extremely simple. You can say, working, relaxing, just chilling, or nothing much.
Yes, and that's something very important to understand. You don't need to say, "I am currently working," or "I am relaxing at home." You can just say, "working," or "relaxing." That's completely natural in spoken English.
The same thing happens when people talk about the past. If someone asks, "What did you do yesterday?" the answer doesn't need to be long. You can say, "Worked all day," "stayed home," or "went out with friends."
Exactly. And if the other person wants more information, they will ask another question. That's how conversations grow naturally.
Yes, one question, one simple answer, then another question. You don't need to give everything at once.
Another very common situation is when people ask about plans. For example, "What are you doing later?" Or, "Do you have any plans tonight?"
And again, the answers are usually very simple. You might say, "Not much," "just staying home," "meeting a friend," or "working a bit."
And what's important here is that these answers are not incomplete. They are normal. That's how people speak.
Yes, and that's something learners sometimes misunderstand. They think simple answers are not enough, but actually simple answers are what make conversations feel natural.
Another interesting point is that people often give approximate answers. For example, if someone asks, "What time are you leaving?" you might say, "Around 6," or "in a bit," or "soon."
Exactly. Everyday English is not always precise. People don't always give exact information, and that's completely normal.
And something else you'll notice is that people often add small reactions when answering. For example, if someone asks, "Are you tired?" you might say, "Yeah, a little," or "A bit, yeah."
These small additions make the answer sound more natural and more human. It's not just information, it's also a feeling.
Yes, and sometimes people combine an answer with a feeling. For example, "I'm tired, but it's okay," or "I'm busy, but it's going well."
That's very common. It adds a little personality to the answer without making it long or complicated.
Now, something else that happens very often in conversations is that people don't always give a direct answer. Instead of saying a clear yes or no, they give a softer or more indirect answer. For example, if someone asks, "Do you like this place?" you could say yes or no, but in real conversations, people often say things like, "It's nice," or "It's not bad," or "Yeah, it's okay." These answers are less direct, but they sound more natural and more comfortable.
Yes, and this is something that is very common in English. People often avoid very strong answers, especially in casual conversations. They prefer softer expressions that leave some space. For example, instead of saying, "No, I don't like it," someone might say, "It's not really my thing," or "I'm not a big fan."
Exactly. And these types of answers help keep the conversation smooth. They don't create tension, and they sound more polite.
Another important situation is when you don't know the answer to a question. This happens all the time. And the good news is that the answer can be very simple. You can say, "I don't know," or "No idea," or "I'm not sure."
And even here, people often choose softer versions. For example, "I'm not really sure," or "I'm not sure about that," or "I'm not too sure." These small variations make the answer feel more natural.
Yes, and sometimes people also explain a little bit. For example, "I'm not sure, I haven't checked," or "I don't know, I haven't thought about it."
That's a very natural way to answer, because it adds just a little context without making the answer too long.
Another very common situation is when someone asks a question and you answer, but you also react at the same time. For example, if someone asks, "Was it difficult?" you might say, "Yeah, it was a bit difficult." Or, "Not really. It was quite easy, actually."
These types of answers combine information and reaction. They feel more natural than a simple yes or no.
Yes, and they help the conversation continue more easily.
Another thing you'll notice is that people often repeat part of the question in their answer. For example, "Are you working tomorrow?" "Yeah, I'm working tomorrow."
This repetition is very common in spoken English. It makes the answer clearer and gives it a more natural rhythm.
And sometimes people don't repeat everything, just part of it. For example, "Are you coming tonight?" "Yeah, I am."
Exactly. These small structures are used all the time.
Another interesting point is that people often change their answer while they are speaking. For example, someone might start by saying, "Yeah, I think I'll go," and then continue with, "Actually, I'm not sure yet."
Yes, that happens very often. And it's completely normal. It shows that the person is thinking while speaking and that the conversation is spontaneous.
This is something learners sometimes worry about. They think they need to know exactly what they are going to say before they start speaking.
But in reality, even native speakers don't do that. They start speaking, and then they adjust their answer as they go.
Another very common pattern is giving a short answer and then adding a small detail. For example, "Yeah, I've been there once," or "No, I've never tried that," or "Yeah, I saw it last week."
These answers are simple, but they give just enough information to keep the conversation going.
And again, if the other person is interested, they will ask another question.
Exactly. You don't need to say everything at once.
Another important situation is when you want to say no, but in a polite way. For example, if someone asks, "Do you want to come with us?" you can say, "I'd love to, but I can't," or "Not this time," or "Maybe another day."
These answers are very common because they allow you to refuse without sounding negative.
Yes, and they help maintain a good atmosphere in the conversation.
Another situation is when you don't understand the question. Instead of guessing, it's completely normal to say, "Sorry, I didn't catch that," or "Can you repeat?"
Or even, "What do you mean?" if the question is not clear.
These are also part of answering in a conversation.
Yes, because answering is not only about giving information. Sometimes it's about asking for clarification.
And that's a very important point. A conversation is always an exchange. You listen, you answer, you ask again if needed.
Another very common thing is answering with very short words. For example, "Do you want coffee?" "Sure. Are you ready?" "Yeah." "Did you like it?" "Yeah, it was good."
These answers are extremely simple, but they are used all the time.
And they are perfectly natural.
Over time, you realize that answering questions in English is not about building perfect sentences.
It's about reacting naturally, using simple language, and keeping the conversation moving.
Another thing that makes answering questions easier in English is understanding that you don't always need to give a complete answer immediately. In many situations, people take a moment before answering, and they use small phrases to do that naturally. For example, if someone asks you something unexpected, you might say, "That's a good question," or "Let me think for a second," or even just, These small expressions are very common. They give you time to think, but they also keep the conversation alive. Instead of staying silent, you show that you're engaged.
Yes, and that's something very useful for learners. Silence can feel uncomfortable, especially in a foreign language. But using these small phrases helps you stay in control of the conversation. For example, if someone asks you something a bit more complex, like, "Why did you choose that?" you don't need to answer immediately. You can say, "That's a good question," and then continue your answer.
Exactly. It gives you a moment to organize your thoughts, and it sounds completely natural. Another very common situation is when people answer with uncertainty. For example, if someone asks, "Will it rain tomorrow?" you might say, "I think so," or "Probably," or "I'm not sure, but I think it might."
These types of answers are everywhere in everyday English. People are often not 100% sure, and they express that naturally.
Yes, and that's important. You don't need to be certain to answer a question. You can show doubt, and that's perfectly normal.
Another interesting pattern is when people answer and then slightly correct themselves. For example, someone might say, "Yeah, I went there last week." Actually, no, it was 2 weeks ago.
Yes, that happens all the time. People adjust their answers while speaking.
And it's a very important thing to understand because many learners think they need to be correct from the beginning.
But in reality, conversations are flexible. You can start an answer, then change it, and that's completely natural.
Another thing that happens very often is that people answer a question and then ask a question back. For example, "What are you doing tonight?" "Not much, just staying home." "What about you?"
Yes, that's a very important part of conversation.
It shows interest, and it keeps the conversation balanced.
Exactly. Conversations are not just about answering, they are about sharing and exchanging.
Another useful pattern is when people answer in a way that invites the other person to continue. For example, "Yeah, I went there once, it was really nice," or "I tried that before, it was quite interesting."
These answers are still simple, but they open the door for more conversation.
Yes, they give the other person something to react to.
Another common situation is when the answer depends on the situation. For example, if someone asks, "Are you busy?" you might say, "A little," or "Not really," or "Kind of."
These answers are not very precise, but they are very natural.
And they allow flexibility. You don't lock yourself into a strong answer.
Another important thing is that people often answer using very simple vocabulary, even when they could use more complex words. For example, instead of saying, "I am exhausted," people often say, "I'm really tired."
Yes, and that's a key point.
Natural English is not about using difficult words. It's about using simple words in a natural way.
And the same applies when answering questions.
You don't need advanced vocabulary. You need simple, clear, and natural expressions.
Another thing you'll notice is that people often answer with small combinations. For example, "Yeah, a little." "Not really, no." "Yeah, I think so." "No, not yet."
These combinations are very common. They sound natural because they reflect how people actually think and speak.
Yes, and they also make answers feel less robotic.
Another interesting point is that sometimes the answer is not really important. What matters is the interaction. For example, if someone asks, "Did you sleep well?" the real purpose is not just the information, it's to start a conversation.
Exactly. And that's why the answer doesn't need to be perfect.
You can say, "Yeah, pretty well," or "Not really, I was a bit tired," and that's enough.
The conversation will continue naturally from there.
Another thing learners often discover is that answering becomes easier with exposure.
The more you hear these patterns, the more natural they feel.
You stop translating in your head, and you start reacting automatically.
And that's really the goal.
To reach a point where answering a question doesn't feel like a task, but like a natural reaction.
And once you reach that point, conversations become much more comfortable.
One last thing that can really help when answering questions in English is understanding that you don't need to be perfect to be understood. Many learners hesitate because they want to give the correct answer with the correct grammar and the correct structure. But in real conversations, that's not what matters most. What matters is that your answer is clear, simple, and natural. For example, if someone asks you a question and your answer is not perfectly structured, it usually doesn't matter. As long as the meaning is clear, the conversation will continue.
Yes, and that's something you start to realize when you listen to real conversations. People make small mistakes all the time. They forget words, they change their sentences, they simplify what they want to say. But the conversation still works, because communication is happening.
Exactly. And when you accept that, answering questions becomes much easier. You stop trying to build the perfect sentence, and you start focusing on the idea you want to express.
Another helpful thing is to keep your answers simple, especially at the beginning. Instead of trying to say something complex, you can start with a simple answer and then add more if you want. For example, if someone asks, "How was your weekend?" you can start with, "It was good." And then, if you feel comfortable, you can add something like, "I stayed home and relaxed," or "I went out with friends."
Yes, and that's a very natural way to speak. You build your answer step by step instead of trying to say everything at once.
And this also reduces stress because you don't need to prepare a long answer in your head. You just start and then you continue.
Another important point is that answering questions is not only about giving information, it's also about creating a connection with the other person. When someone asks you a question, they are opening a conversation, and your answer is a way to continue that interaction.
Yes, and that's why tone and attitude are just as important as the words. A simple answer with a friendly tone can create a much better conversation than a perfect answer that sounds cold or distant.
Exactly. And that's something that becomes very clear when you listen to native speakers. They don't try to impress with complex answers. They try to stay connected and keep the conversation comfortable.
Another thing that helps a lot is practice. The more you answer questions in English, the easier it becomes. At the beginning, you might need a little time to think, but over time, your answers become faster, more natural, and more automatic.
Yes, and that's because your brain starts recognizing patterns. You don't think about every word anymore, you just react.
And that's really the goal of this kind of practice, to move from thinking to reacting.
So if you take one idea from today's episode, it's this. You don't need perfect answers to have a good conversation in English.
You just need simple, natural answers that allow the conversation to continue.
And the more you listen, the more you practice, and the more you speak, the easier it becomes.
Over time, answering questions will feel natural, almost automatic.
And that's when you know you're making real progress.
Before we finish, thank you very much for spending this time with us today.
We hope this episode helps you feel more comfortable answering questions in English in your daily life.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to the channel or share it with someone who is learning English.
It really helps us grow, and we truly appreciate your support.
Thanks again for listening.
And remember, keep speaking English every day.